smell of roasted garlic, fresh herbs, and slow-cooked beef filled the dining room, long before the first plate touched the table. Claire Parker had spent most of her Saturday preparing the meal, moving between the kitchen island and the stove while checking recipes she barely needed anymore, determined to make this dinner perfect. It wasn't because Ryan had asked her to. He never did. It was because Margaret Parker was coming. That fact alone had a way of turning ordinary evenings into tests. By 6:30, everyone had arrived. Ryan sat at the head of the table while his mother occupied the chair beside him, as if it had been reserved for her. Olivia lounged comfortably across from Claire, scrolling through her phone between conversations and occasionally exchanging private looks with Margaret whenever Claire left the room. Claire carried the final serving dish to the table and forced a smile. "Everything's ready." Ryan looked up immediately. "It smells amazing." "Thank you." Margaret adjusted the pearl bracelet around her wrist before reaching for the serving spoon. The movement was slow enough to make everyone watch. Claire remained standing, waiting, hoping. Margaret scooped a portion onto her plate, cut into the meat, and took a bite. For a moment, the room fell quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioner. Then Margaret set down her fork. "Oh, Claire." The words alone made Ryan straighten in his chair. Claire's stomach tightened. "What?" Margaret shook her head as though she had just witnessed a disappointing mistake. "My son works 60 hours a week, and this is what you serve him?" Olivia immediately looked interested. "Mom!" Ryan's warning came too late. Margaret pushed her plate away. "The meat is dry, the sauce is bland, and somehow you've managed to overcook the vegetables." Claire blinked. "I followed the recipe exactly." "Then the recipe failed too." Olivia laughed under her breath. Claire looked at Ryan. He looked uncomfortable, not angry, not protective, just uncomfortable. The familiar disappointment settled quietly inside her. "Margaret," Claire said carefully, "I spent most of the day making this. I can tell. That's what worries me." Another laugh from Olivia. Ryan rubbed his forehead. "Mom, that's enough." But it wasn't enough. Margaret stood, lifted the serving dish from the center of the table, and carried it toward the kitchen. For a second, nobody moved. Nobody even seemed to understand what was happening. Claire followed her. "Margaret, what are you doing?" Margaret stopped beside the trash can and looked directly at her. "My son deserves better than this." Then she tipped the entire dish into the garbage. The sound of food hitting the bottom of the bin echoed through the kitchen. Claire froze. 3 hours. 3 hours of preparation. 3 hours of effort. Thrown away in less than 3 seconds. When she turned back toward the dining room, her eyes found Ryan immediately. She didn't need him to yell. She didn't need him to choose a fight. She just needed him to say something. Anything. Ryan stood slowly. "Mom, you shouldn't have done that." Margaret shrugged. "And yet I did." Nobody spoke. Not Olivia. Not Ryan. Not even Claire. The silence stretched long enough to become its own answer. Claire lowered her gaze, swallowed the lump rising in her throat, and walked past everyone without another word. She disappeared upstairs while the family remained frozen around the table, and although Ryan watched her leave, he never followed. For the first time since their wedding, Claire wondered whether being married and being alone could feel exactly the same. The next morning should have felt awkward after what had happened at dinner, but Claire quickly realized that awkwardness required at least one person to acknowledge a line had been crossed. Margaret behaved as though nothing unusual had happened. She arrived at church wearing one of her cream-colored jackets, greeted people with practiced warmth, and accepted compliments about her family with the confidence of a woman who had never once questioned her own behavior. If anyone had looked closely enough, they might have noticed Claire's smile never quite reached her eyes, but church was not a place where people looked closely. It was a place where families performed happiness. Ryan drove them home afterward, keeping one hand on the steering wheel while occasionally glancing toward Claire. He knew she was upset. He knew she had every right to be. The problem was that guilt and action were not the same thing. And for most of his life, guilt had been enough to convince him he was trying. "I'm sorry about yesterday," he said quietly as they pulled into the driveway. Claire stared out the passenger window for several seconds before answering. "Are you sorry about what happened, or are you sorry that I got hurt?" Ryan frowned. "What's the difference?" "The difference is that one requires you to do something." He had no answer for that. 3 days later, Claire came home from work carrying grocery bags and immediately knew something was wrong. The living room looked familiar, but not familiar enough. The framed photographs she and Ryan had chosen together were gone from the mantel. The decorative pillows had disappeared from the sofa. Even the curtains had changed. She slowly set the grocery bags on the kitchen counter. Then she walked back into the living room. Then she looked again. Ryan emerged from his office upstairs just as she was trying to process what she was seeing. "Ryan." He immediately recognized the tone. "What happened?" She pointed toward the windows. "That's what I'm asking you." Ryan looked around. The color drained from his face. His mother sat comfortably in the armchair beside the fireplace with a cup of tea balanced on one knee. "The old curtains were depressing," Margaret explained. "These brighten the room." Claire stared at her. "You changed our house." Margaret smiled. "I improved it." "Our house. Well, technically it's Ryan's house." The words landed exactly the way Margaret intended. Claire noticed Olivia sitting nearby, pretending not to enjoy the moment while very obviously enjoying it. "You entered my home and changed things without asking me." Margaret set down her teacup. "Claire, you keep saying you're home as though you were the one paying the mortgage." The room became very quiet. Even Olivia stopped smiling. Ryan stepped forward. "Mom." Margaret turned toward him. "What?" "You can't do that." "Oh, now I'm not allowed to help?" "That's not helping." Claire watched the exchange carefully. For the first time, Ryan wasn't trying to change the subject. He wasn't trying to make everyone comfortable. He was actually pushing back. Margaret noticed it too. Something hard flashed behind her eyes. "I'm beginning to think marriage has made you forget who raised you." Ryan took a slow breath. "No. Marriage is reminding me who I made promises to." For a moment, nobody spoke. The tension settled heavily across the room. Margaret eventually stood and smoothed the front of her jacket. "Fine. If my presence is such a burden, perhaps I should leave." Nobody stopped her. Not immediately. Not even Ryan. The performance lost some of its power when nobody rushed to reassure her. Margaret walked toward the door. Olivia followed. But before leaving, she paused beside Claire. "You know," she said with a small smile, "most women would be grateful to have family helping them." Then she walked out. The front door closed. Silence followed. Claire remained standing in the middle of the living room, while sunlight filtered through the new curtains Margaret had chosen. Ryan moved closer, but not close enough to touch her. "She'll calm down." Claire laughed softly, not because anything was funny, because she was tired. "Ryan, your mother threw away my dinner in front of everyone." He lowered his eyes. "Then she came into our house and redesigned it like I don't exist. I know. No, you don't. Because if you did, something would change." Ryan looked around the room, taking in every detail his mother had altered. The furniture, the curtains, the photographs, all the small decisions Claire had made while building a life with him. For the first time, he saw the situation through her eyes, not as an argument, not as family drama, but as an invasion. Claire folded her arms and looked directly at him. "I'm not asking you to choose between your mother and me." Ryan met her gaze. "I'm asking you to act like my husband." This time, he didn't look away. The conversation in the living room changed something, but not enough. For a few days, Margaret stayed away. Ryan seemed more attentive. He came home earlier, helped with dinner, and made a visible effort to spend time with Claire instead of answering every phone call from his mother the moment it arrived. Claire appreciated the effort, yet a part of her remained cautious because she had spent years watching temporary improvements disappear the moment Margaret decided she wanted control again. The illusion lasted exactly 9 days. On the 10th morning, Claire woke with a pounding headache and a heaviness in her body that made even sitting upright difficult. By lunchtime, she was running a fever. Ryan wanted to stay home, but an important client meeting had already been delayed twice, and Claire insisted she would be fine. "I'll survive one afternoon," she told him, while forcing a weak smile. Ryan kissed her forehead. "Call me if you need anything." "I will." He hesitated, then left. The house became quiet. Too quiet. Claire spent most of the afternoon moving between the bedroom and the bathroom, wrapped in a blanket while trying to keep down soup she had barely touched. Around 3 o'clock, she heard voices downstairs. At first, she assumed Ryan had come home early. Then she recognized Margaret's voice and Olivia's. Claire closed her eyes, of course. A few minutes later, she slowly made her way downstairs and found both women sitting comfortably in the living room, as though they owned the place. Shopping bags rested near the sofa, and Margaret was flipping through a home design magazine while Olivia scrolled through her phone. Neither looked surprised to see her. Margaret glanced up first. "You look terrible." Claire leaned against the doorway. "I have the flu." "That's obvious." Olivia barely looked away from her screen. "You should probably go back upstairs before you get everyone sick." Claire ignored the comment. "Did Ryan invite you?" Margaret closed the magazine. "I don't need an invitation to visit my son." Claire was too exhausted to argue. She turned and started back toward the stairs. But halfway there, a wave of dizziness forced her to grab the railing. The room tilted briefly. Margaret watched. Olivia watched. Neither moved. Claire steadied herself and continued upstairs. By 5 o'clock, her fever had gotten worse. The glass of water beside her bed was empty. Her medication sat downstairs in the kitchen. For several minutes, she considered calling Ryan, but she knew he was still in the middle of his meeting. The medicine was less than a minute away. She could manage. Slowly, she walked downstairs. Every step felt heavier than the last. When she reached the living room, Margaret and Olivia were exactly where she had left them. Claire swallowed. "Could one of you help me for a second?" Margaret looked up. "Help you with what?" "My medication is in the kitchen." Olivia raised an eyebrow. "The kitchen is 20 feet away." "I know." "Then walk 20 feet. Claire stared at her. For a moment, she genuinely thought she had misunderstood. "I just need some water." Olivia shrugged. "So, get some." Margaret returned her attention to the magazine. The dismissal hurt more than the words themselves. Not because Claire expected kindness from them. Because she suddenly realized neither woman felt even slightly uncomfortable about refusing it. She turned without responding and continued toward the kitchen. Halfway there, another dizzy spell hit. Her hand slipped against the counter. A glass crashed onto the floor. The sound echoed through the house. Still, neither woman moved. Claire stood frozen, gripping the edge of the countertop while shattered glass scattered across the tile. Then the front door opened. Ryan stepped inside. The first thing he saw was the broken glass. The second thing he saw was Claire struggling to remain standing. His expression changed instantly. "Claire." He crossed the room in seconds. "What happened?" "I'm okay." "You don't look okay." Margaret stood. "She's being dramatic." Ryan slowly turned toward his mother. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Claire had never seen that look on his face before. Not directed at Margaret. Not ever. "She's sick." Margaret folded her arms. "It's a fever, Ryan, not a medical emergency." Ryan looked toward Olivia. "You were both here all afternoon?" Olivia nodded. "So you knew she was sick?" Neither answered. Ryan's jaw tightened. "You watched her try to do everything herself?" Still silence. The realization settled across his face piece by piece. Not confusion, not frustration. Understanding. The kind that arrives too late. Claire watched him connect all the pieces she had been trying to explain for years. The humiliation, the disrespect, the constant reminders that she would never be accepted. This wasn't one incident. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a pattern. And for the first time, Ryan could no longer pretend he didn't see it. "You owe my wife an apology." The words landed heavily in the room. Olivia actually laughed. Apology? Ryan didn't blink. Yes. Olivia stood. This isn't her house, it's ours. The silence that followed felt different from every silence before. This time, nobody looked away. Not Ryan, not Claire, not even Margaret. Because for the first time, everyone understood that something had finally broken. Nobody spoke after Olivia's words, because there was nothing left to misunderstand. Ryan stood in the middle of the kitchen while the pieces of shattered glass remained scattered across the floor, and for the first time in years, he stopped looking for a way to keep everyone happy. Every argument, every excuse, every uncomfortable dinner, and every moment Claire had quietly endured seemed to gather inside that silence until it became impossible to ignore. Margaret was the first to move. "You're overreacting," she said, folding her arms. "Your wife is sick, emotions are running high, and suddenly everyone is acting as though we've committed a crime." Ryan looked at her. Not like a son, like a man finally seeing something clearly. "She asked for water," Margaret rolled her eyes. "Ryan, she asked for help." The firmness in his voice surprised everyone, including Claire. Margaret tried a different approach. "You've changed." Ryan nodded slowly. "That's exactly the problem." For a brief moment, uncertainty appeared on Margaret's face. It disappeared almost immediately. "I raised you better than this." Ryan let out a quiet breath. "No, Mom, you raised me to keep you happy." The words hit harder than shouting ever could. Olivia stepped forward. "Seriously? You're blaming her now?" Ryan turned toward his sister. "I'm blaming both of you." Olivia laughed in disbelief. "For what? For making Claire feel unwelcome in her own home. This again? No, not this again. This ends tonight." The room went completely still. Claire could see Margaret calculating her next move. For years, she had controlled every conflict through guilt, disappointment, tears, or emotional pressure. It was a game she had always won because Ryan eventually surrendered. This time he didn't. Margaret's eyes softened, her voice followed. "Ryan, sweetheart, I think you're tired. You've been under pressure at work and you're upset because Claire isn't feeling well. Let's talk tomorrow." Ryan shook his head. "No. Please don't do this. I'm already doing it." Margaret stared at him. For the first time, genuine fear appeared behind her composure. Ryan pointed toward the front door. "I want both of you to leave." Olivia blinked. "What?" "You heard me." Margaret looked stunned. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious." Claire remained frozen near the kitchen counter while years of frustration, resentment, disappointment, and grief unfolded in front of her. Part of her wanted to intervene, but another part understood that this conversation no longer belonged to her. It belonged to Ryan. Margaret's voice trembled. "After everything I've done for you?" Ryan's expression softened, but he didn't retreat. "That's exactly why this took so long." Tears formed in Margaret's eyes. For years, those tears had worked like magic. They didn't work now. "The day I married Claire," Ryan said quietly, "she became my family too. The problem is that I spent years acting like she wasn't." The words landed heavily in the room. Claire lowered her gaze for a moment because hearing them hurt almost as much as hearing them healed. Margaret looked toward her, then back at Ryan, then toward Olivia. Nobody was rescuing her. Nobody was apologizing. Nobody was surrendering. For the first time in her life, she was losing control. Without another word, she picked up her purse. Olivia hesitated longer. "You'll regret this." Ryan calmly opened the front door. "No, I should have done it years ago." A few seconds later, both women walked outside. The door closed, and for the first time since their wedding, the house felt peaceful. 6 months later, Olivia Parker stood inside a luxury condominium overlooking downtown Atlanta and wondered how her life had become a nightmare. Daniel Brooks wasn't a bad husband. In many ways, he reminded her of Ryan. That was the problem, because Eleanor Brooks reminded her of Margaret. Every decision required approval. Every holiday belonged to Eleanor. Every disagreement somehow ended with Daniel choosing peace over confrontation. The similarities had seemed amusing at first. Now they felt suffocating. That afternoon, Eleanor criticized Olivia's cooking in front of guests, rearranged her dining room without permission, and openly informed her that Daniel deserved a wife with better domestic instincts. The room laughed politely. Olivia didn't. For the first time in her life, humiliation wasn't happening to someone else. It was happening to her, and suddenly she remembered every expression Claire had hidden over the years, every forced smile, every awkward silence, every look of disappointment after Ryan failed to defend her. The realization hit like a physical blow, because now she understood. 3 weeks later, Olivia parked her car in front of Ryan and Claire's house and sat behind the wheel for almost 10 minutes before finding the courage to get out. The irony wasn't lost on her. For years she had walked through that front door without hesitation, convinced she belonged there more than Claire ever would. Now her hands trembled as she approached the porch. Claire answered the door. For a moment, neither woman spoke. Olivia looked exhausted. The confidence that had once surrounded her seemed worn away by months of living inside the same kind of pain she had helped create. "Can we talk?" Claire studied her quietly before stepping aside. A few minutes later, they sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the same table where so many uncomfortable family dinners had begun. Olivia stared down at her hands. "I used to think you were being dramatic." Claire remained silent. "I thought you complained because you wanted attention. I thought Mom was trying to help. I thought—" She swallowed hard. "I thought I understood everything." Outside, a breeze moved gently through the trees beyond the window. Inside, the silence felt heavier. "Eleanor humiliated me in front of 20 people last week," Olivia continued. "Daniel didn't say a word." Claire lowered her eyes. She already knew how that felt. Olivia laughed softly, though there was no humor in it. "And the worst part wasn't Eleanor." Claire looked up. "It was Daniel," Olivia nodded. "Because every time he stayed silent, I remembered Ryan staying silent. Every time Eleanor crossed a line, I remembered Mom crossing one." Her voice cracked. For the first time since Claire had known her, Olivia looked genuinely ashamed. "I became the thing that hurt you." The words hung between them, not an excuse, not a justification, a confession. Claire felt years of resentment shift inside her, not disappearing completely, but losing some of their weight. Before she could answer, another voice came from the doorway. "I know." Both women turned. Margaret stood there. Neither of them had heard her arrive. For a moment, she looked older than Claire had ever seen her. Not physically, emotionally. Margaret slowly approached the table. "I spent months telling myself I wasn't like Eleanor," she said quietly. "Then I listened to my daughter describe her and realized I was listening to my own reflection." Nobody interrupted. Margaret looked directly at Claire. The pride that had protected her for so many years finally seemed exhausted. "I'm sorry." Claire waited. Margaret continued. "I can't change what I did. I can't give back the years I made harder than they should have been. But I am sorry." The room fell silent again. Then Claire nodded. Not because everything had been fixed. Not because the past had disappeared. Because sometimes healing begins when someone finally tells the truth. That evening, Ryan arrived home carrying takeout from Claire's favorite restaurant. They all shared dinner together, and although the conversation remained careful at first, it gradually became easier. As the sun disappeared beyond the neighborhood rooftops, Claire looked around the table and realized something had changed. For the first time, nobody was competing for control. Nobody was trying to win. And sitting beside her, Ryan reached for her hand without hesitation. This time, he didn't let go.